So this is session 4 of the mini bootcamp. If you want to continue to follow along, the URL for the DevOps project is in the bottom left of the slide right here. We're going to be redoing most of what we did last session because we couldn't get a recording because my internet cut off at the time. So yeah, let's give it another shot. Today, we're going to be talking about continuing on from our continuous delivery. So we had a homework session in between each one, but since we lost a week or two, we'll probably just put the homework into next week when we talk about Azure boards as well. And the items in red are what we're focusing on. Continuous delivery, we're going to be using pipeline stages, and we're going to be converting our artifacts into Azure Artifacts. All the items in green we've already accomplished, and the black items are what's to come. So today we'll be talking about two things: environments and Azure Artifacts. We'll start with Azure Artifacts. They are used so you can create and share Maven, Node, NuGet, and universal package feeds from public and private sources. You can add like fully integrated package management into your CI/CD pipelines. So what I mean by package management is our previous artifacts that we were working with were called build artifacts, and they exist within the pipeline. They were the output of two tasks that we had in our pipeline that would take our web app template, the ARM template, and the web app zip file that we were using to publish our .NET Core web app. So we're going to be taking those and turning them into Azure Artifacts. But with the previous artifacts, build artifacts, you couldn't really discover them easily. They only existed within the pipeline. So if you wanted to see the output of those, you would have to kind of dig around a little bit. So that's what I mean by Azure Artifacts gives us more management. To discover them, you got to navigate around to find the successful build process, and then you'll see a link to the build artifact. And this works, but like I said, they're less discoverable. So to show you what I'm talking about, we'll go to our previous builds. And we'll just click on the last one because we had a successful build. So to see your artifacts in the pipeline, you kind of got to navigate here, and then you see artifacts, and there's two published. And here they are. There's our zip file, and there's our template file. So it's okay. It has like a little bit of a weird name. You can only reference it by the build number. And Azure Artifacts, on the other hand, contain version numbers. So in the screenshot here, you see there's 3 of them, and it has a version 0.0.8 as opposed to something like Artifact to 2019 1205.1. .1 indicates it's the first build of that day. So it's a little bit easier to work with version numbers, and also to tell your team what to work with. It's telling them to work with 2019, whatever may not be the most clear way to share information. And so with Azure Artifacts, you get that version numbering, and you can automatically increment that version every time you create a new build, and you can increment it in the major.minor.patch format. So say you're making a build in your dev environment or your POC environment or something like that, you can increment the patch version. And if you only want to deploy 1.0 or 2.0 kind of candidates to your production environment, you can specify only deploy those because now you have a version number. Whereas with the build artifacts, you could specify the specific build number, but that's not very useful when it's a date and a build number for the day. You can specify the latest. That also works, and we'll kind of be doing that with Azure Artifacts as well, but you can see that the version numbering gives us a little bit more flexibility. You can also surface these artifacts to other projects and teams outside of your DevOps projects. If external teams are using your Azure Artifacts, they can add your artifact feed to their CI/CD orchestration tool and pull the latest versions down. These advantages aren't particularly compelling for our purpose, but the goal of these sessions is to kind of explore every major feature of Azure DevOps and integrate it into our project for learning purposes. Personally, I prefer Azure Artifacts because they offer that discoverability. but we're not getting any particular functionality advantage out of it for our project. It just feels like our project is incomplete without us using that Azure Artifacts button. If it's just sitting there doing nothing, it makes me just want to use it. So what I'm talking about is right here, there's Azure Artifacts. And this is where you can either create a feed and publish your artifacts to that, or if you had an external feed or someone wanted to connect to your feed, they can do that right here. The next thing we're going to be doing today is creating environments. So environments represent the resources that are targeted by your pipelines. For example, Kubernetes clusters, app services, VMs. Typical examples of environments, of course, are development, QA, production, that kind of thing. We're calling these environments stages in our previous classic pipelines. The classic pipeline also supported approvals before each stage. In YAML, which we've switched to multi-stage YAML, we cannot do approvals without creating environments, so this is a necessary step. Just to give you a quick example of what that used to look like, in our classic release pipeline, we had this one, looks like it failed, but whatever. We had stages, and a lot of people were using this kind of concept to create environments. So if I were to edit this old pipeline, I could click on this one and say, this is my POC stage. And then I would be able to clone it and say, this is my production stage. I could change the parameters of it. Say I wanted to choose a different template parameter file or something. That's where we would do that. So these were called stages, and inside each stage we named an environment. We're not doing that anymore. We're actually going to be using this feature here, environments, because it also gives us that approval. In the classic one, you could click on these pre-deployment conditions, and you can turn on pre-deployment approvals and say, oh, this person needs to get an email alert saying that there's a release ready to deploy. This functionality doesn't exist in multi-stage pipelines. It is a function of this here, environments, and we're going to create one of those today. Environments, though, in like their simplest form, it's just a string inside your YAML. The pipeline can discover and register that environment. By defining the environment in Azure DevOps, you describe where the code gets deployed. So deployments are created when the pipeline job deploys a new version of the code to that environment. We'll be also introducing a new job type in our YAML file called deployment, and we're going to jump into that in 1 second. Let's move on to our demos. This is what we're going to do. We're going to switch to Azure Artifacts from our build artifacts. Then we're going to create that environment, one for dev and one for prod, and then we're going to create a release approval in our multi-stage YAML. If you were watching last week, because we had to stop almost at the end, all the work that we put into that YAML file was reverted. If you're ever wondering how to revert something, I was editing this file. You can go to the history, and right here is where I reverted my changes just to get us back to that spot. But what you can do to revert is click on the commit that you want to revert to. It'll show all the changes. These are all the ones we did last week. And you can just click up here and say revert. What it does is I won't actually go through with it, but what it does is it creates a new branch off of master. And then it puts your reverted changes back into that branch. And if it looks okay, you create a pull request, it merges it back into master, and then you're back where you started. So let's change our pipeline to use Azure Artifacts. The first thing we need to do is create an artifact feed. I already have one here, but it's just because there's some previous examples and it's good to see content instead of a blank screen. But if you needed to create a new one, there's not much to it. You're just going to type a name in here. and set whether or not you want it to be public. And it gets that from your project availability as well. So we're not going to use this one. We're just going to use the one that I've already been working on. We have some previous versions in here. One other kind of annoying thing about Azure Artifacts, this is one of the benefits I like about the build ones, is when we look at our old one, let's go into here, and we look at this last build. In here, we click on these two artifacts like we were just looking at, and you can expand them and see what was actually in them. I wish you could do that in Azure Artifacts, but all you get is that version number, and you can't actually see the content of it. You'd have to download it and see what's inside of it. So that's one, maybe it's a downside to be aware of. It does give you some cool stats though. How many people have downloaded it, time it was built, all that stuff is still there, including that commit code. So you don't lose that information. All right, so we created our artifacts feed. Let's go and edit our pipeline. And we're going to convert these tasks into publishing Azure Artifacts. Kind of the same thing we were doing before, except we're going to use a new task. And I mentioned you can use Maven, Node, NuGet, and universal packages. We're going to be using universal packages to publish to our artifact feed. The reason why we're using universal is because these templates in this zip file aren't really any particular type of format like Node or NuGet or anything like that. It's just universal is for pretty much everything else. We're going to choose universal. I'm going to switch this from download to publish, and that's going to push it to that artifact feed. We're going to use this publish path because that's what we are using here. That's where our zip file and our templates are. And we're going to choose the destination artifact feed, which we were talking about this one. If I didn't have this created before, I don't think you would be able to, oh, maybe you can type. Sorry, some of these fields you can't actually type in, and if it doesn't exist, it won't let you. Let's see. Oh, cool. Never mind. So we're going to publish the artifacts demo, and this one we're working on is our web app. So I'm going to choose this package name. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is actually new, because last week I couldn't type in a name that didn't exist. Cool. Good to know. So we're going to publish it as the web app. And here's where you get those options to publish your major, minor, or patch. We're just going to leave this on patch. We'll position our cursor in the right spot because it's going to paste all this over there. And we'll say add. So the highlighted section is replacing this section. But with YAML, we're very particular about indenting, so we got to fix that. There we go. And it's as simple as that. So get rid of this one because we don't need it anymore. Converted that to an Azure artifact. And now let's do the same thing for our templates folder, or our template files, which is in this folder inside of system default working directory. Exact same process. Universal package, publish, and we are keeping them there, so let's put it there. And we'll choose the same artifact feed. And let's call it templates. I think that should do it. No missing quotes. Awesome.
I've got a quick question. Are we able to edit these files in VS Code as well? Or is it just through DevOps?
Which files?
These YAML files.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Let me just open a new tab here and I'll show you. So that's one of the benefits of using the multi-stage YAML pipelines is even though we're in pipelines, and when I click on edit here, it's showing a file editor. The file actually does exist in the repo. The reason why we're doing it in this editor is because it gives us a few extra options. It gives us these settings buttons above each task, which gives us this task pane here. But since it's in the repo, we can actually just go here, and here's the file right there. But we don't get those helpful features for adding this in, and unfortunately, I don't remember all the parameters for this thing, so I always use the helpful little editor that comes with it.
Roger that. Thank you.
No problem. One other note about that is, yeah, it stores it in the pipeline. That's cool. But the benefit of it being there is that now that it's a file in a pipeline, and if you're working on a branch and you need to merge that into master, you now go through an approval process. So nobody can change the pipeline without going through code review. Whereas with the old pipeline, as long as someone had editor access to the pipeline, they could change it, and there was no code review process. There still was a history, but this history wasn't stored in, it was like stored in some magical spot somewhere in DevOps and not surfaced in the Git history. You could still see the differences there, but no code review could take place. So that's one of the cool benefits of using these multi-stage YAML pipelines. Awesome. So that one looks good. So this is replacing this. So we've converted those. However, down at the bottom, we were also downloading our build artifacts to use them for the deployment. So in our deployment stage here, and this is part of the reason why we have this environments now and not stages, because there's an actual term called stage inside of the YAML, and so we can't say a stage is an environment. So somewhere in here, we were downloading an artifact. Yeah, here we go. We were downloading our, replaced it with a helpful non-friendly name, but this should be our web app, the zip file. So let's also replace that. And instead of using publish, we're going to use download. And the destination directory, let's put it here because that's where we're looking for that zip file. And we're going to choose the feed and the web app name. Let's see, this was also a bug last time, so, oh, cool, that's awesome. Last time you could not, we want to use the latest version, and you could only select what version was in the list here. So we would pick this one, hit add, and then change the version to just a star, but I'm going to see if this works. Star. And add it over here. Ah, that's awesome. I'm so glad that was fixed. I wonder if that changes for all the other things that you couldn't fill in the dropdown. Cool. So we've downloaded it, and that's replacing this. Yep, that looks pretty good. So let's save that. And we'll put a helpful comment in here, changing to Azure Artifacts. And if we did everything right, we have a trigger to set up a build whenever there's a change to the repo. And we're going to have our build process in our build stage. It's going to hopefully update the artifact feed. That can take a few minutes. So while we're doing that, let's move on to environments. Okay, so you'll notice in my environments, I don't have anything set up here yet. I have the option of creating one first or going into the pipeline and creating the environment through the YAML file. The reason why you would want to create it first is because if your environment requires approval, you can't define the approval in the YAML first. So when it deploys, it's going to create the environment automatically for you, and it will also deploy it. If you want to make sure that what you're about to deploy doesn't, and it needs approval, doesn't accidentally go without that approval the first time, you would want to create the environment first. And I'm not going to create it first, but I'll show you what the process is because it's super easy. You just type in the name of it. And then actually, I'll just make one. We'll call it test. And on the next stage, you can set the approvals. But we're not going to use this test environment. We're going to create one called dev. Cool. All right. Let's hold off on moving to environment since this is almost done. We have, yeah, looks like it went successfully. Here's our universal package for, I believe it was the templates first, and the universal package for our web app. So if we jump over to Azure Artifacts and look at the feed, this incremented to .10, and this is also .10. Awesome. I don't know if this is going to successfully complete all the way to the end, but that's okay. Cool. So let's define an environment. Since environments are a deployment kind of thing, we're going to put that into our stage that is for deploy. Deployment is a new kind of job. So this structure is kind of going to change a bit. We still have our stage for deploy, and it still depends on the validation stage to be successful. But instead of this generic job type of job, there is, that sounds super confusing, there's multiple types of jobs. Deployment is a job type. So we're going to change it to deployment. We'll still keep it with the same name. But now we're going to add the environment section because the environment comes with the deployment. Environment dev. And each environment of a deployment job requires a strategy. And inside each strategy, you need a type of strategy. These names are not really confusing, but they don't really satisfy me anyway when I try to understand them. There's two types of strategies. There's one called run once, and there's another one called canary. There might be other ones, but I'm pretty sure there's only two right now. So canary is a strategy where you want to deploy your resources to say 10% of your existing environment because you just want to test out these changes amongst, I don't know, random users. We're just deploying a single web app. There's nothing too complex about this, and so we don't need canary. But since strategies need a name or a type, run once is unfortunately the name of the strategy that we're using. Is there a run twice? No, I don't think so. But since it's part of the syntax and it's needed, that's unfortunately the best explanation I can give for what run once even means. And then the steps for a run once strategy are deploy. Now we got to fix up our tabs. And I probably got these wrong somewhere. Deployment goes there, strategy there. Let's see. I think this goes here. It's very picky on the indenting. What am I missing? Sorry, just one sec. Gotta figure this out. Job. We have. Wait. I think I have another copy of a working one somewhere. Let's see. I'm missing something here. We got it last week. What did I do? Environment strategy. Tab, tab, tab. I think I missed one tab. There we go. Cool, so that's going to put our templates into the dev environment, and we also want to have our web app deploy into that environment. And now that is also a job. So we're going to change this to deployment as well. Instead of the job type job, we'll put environment here. Also needs a strategy. And all the same stuff. Move this up just so it all looks the same. Wait, should that be there? Oh no, that's fine. This is saying since it's depending on this one, whereas this depends on is of a previous stage. This one is depending on, where did it go? This one is depending on a previous task. Tabs rate, and this one's going to be the same thing. All right, now back to the fun of lining these up properly. Deployment, environment, strategy, run once, deploy, and steps. This is looking still suspicious though. Environment, strategy, run once. See what we got here. Oh no, I guess I had that right before. This is honestly the worst part about using these multi-stage pipelines is because of this indenting.
If you hover over the squiggle under tasks, will that give you more information?
Yeah, sometimes it does, but it's not, it hasn't been too reliable that I've actually just stopped looking at them because it gives like an error that's related to, I don't know, something else that it was expecting up above, but hang in there. I'll just use the one we were using last week.
Thank you.
Oh, you know what? It might have actually been the right help there. It was. That's awesome. Cool. Thank you. Great. So we got.
Just
Sorry,
call me
go ahead.
Captain Obvious. Just call me Captain Obvious.
Oh man, we had a session a couple weeks ago where we were looking at the squiggly lines and it was completely irrelevant and I just gave up all hope, but it's a good day. That's so awesome. Thank you. All right, so we got our deployment stage. We've added the deployment type job. We added our environment. Like I said at the beginning, the environment is just a string. There's nothing special about it other than when the pipeline runs. If we did not create an environment on this screen over here, this is going to create one for us. And that strategy nonsense that I was talking about where you need to use run once and everything else. So each deployment, the reason why we separated the web app deploy with the deploy template is because we want to make sure that one doesn't deploy before the other one finishes. And that should be good. So let's save it. Say converted to environments. Hey, cool. All right, so jumping back to our pipeline, the previous tasks, our build where we converted over to Azure Artifacts, that one worked. We skipped back into the editing while this was actually happening, the validation and deployment stage. The validation was just running the Azure RM deployment with the validate option, and the deploy is actually doing it in incremental mode and then deploying our web app zip file. So that went okay. In our environments, you see now we have dev that was just created. And once this gets to this third stage, the deployment stage, we'll see some information in the dev environment. So while that's happening, this is that part where I was mentioning if you don't create this ahead of time, you can't do the approvals. So in here, we'll add an approval. And I'll just add myself. Weird. And add myself. All right, whatever. I'll add a group that I'm a member of. And you can add a timeout as well. So while that's running, anybody have any questions about how that works? Great. So we'll get into this a little bit later on, but I did mention you can use multiple environments in your pipeline. This is something that you would do using variables. Because if we were to convert, if we not convert, but if we were to say, now we want to deploy this to a production environment, on the classic one, it was really helpful. We could just hit clone that stage and there's prod, and then we edit the special variables for prod and we're good to go. With this, however, there's no real clone option, I guess. And since we've like hard coded the environment here, if we wanted to deploy to an environment called production, you would have to take an entire copy of this, go into your repo, make a new file. And we could say Azure-pipelines.prod.yaml. Paste this in here. And what we could do is say we only wanted production to run when there was an edit to master. In our case, we've been working on master all the time, but more appropriately, we should have been working in a development branch. So we would say anytime there's a change to master, run all this stuff again, except we're going to call the environment prod. Maybe we'll use a parameter file called .prod.json. And we'll commit this. So
hey, Mike, I hear something disturbance in the voice.
Oh, sorry. It's not me. I do sound disturbed at times, but yeah, sorry, I got nothing.
Is anybody else hear a lot of noise in the voice?
It just sounds like there might be some lag on his network. That's all. That happens a lot in Teams.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's maybe internet issue or something. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're almost done. So what I just did was I created a prod YAML file. So, and then I changed the environments to say prod, and that's not really too efficient. So what you can do is set variables and kind of put some logic into this so you only have to use one YAML file, and we're going to do that in the next session. But if you wanted to try it on your own, that's how you would do it. And this one, I guess, should be more appropriately named, say like .dev, and we would only trigger on the development branch. Let's see where we are. Cool, so it's going. And then one other thing you would want to do once you make that prod YAML file is you would then have to create a new pipeline and point it at that YAML file. You'd say new, point it at our repo, existing YAML file, and then it'll give us this option here for prod. I'm going to do it anyway, even though it won't run successfully because I just made up a bunch of nonsense in here. But whatever, errors are fun. And it gives it an unfortunate name. We'll call this prod. We'll work on this next time. And we'll call this one dev. Waiting, my agents are doing something else. Let's cancel this. Cool. Well, while that's going, I'll jump over to an already completed version so you can see what that looks like because it's going pretty slow. Your pipelines in this project, I have some environments that were already created. We'll go to the dev one, and you can see a history of everything that was deployed to that environment. And that's really the entire replacement of the classic pipeline. That's how you implement environments which are no longer considered stages. That's how you update your artifacts to use Azure Artifacts, and it's also how we're adding approvals to our YAML pipeline. So next session, we're going to be using Azure Boards. That's going to be December 12th now. We're going to add some features, stories, and some tasks for code improvement to our web app, because if you remember looking at that web app, it's pretty horrible. It's just a hello world that we edited some banners on. And then we're going to complete those tasks in Azure Boards and track our code changes through those tasks and make a few improvements that'll hopefully make the app a little bit more interesting. Homework, we kind of flew through that part, but that's a little bit of the point of homework. If you are following along and you get your dev pipeline created and you're using all the things that we just converted to, try creating a second pipeline for prod and see if you can get it deployed to the environment. We'll review it at the beginning of the next session. And I'll upload this PowerPoint to the team site so you can get these reference links, but these are just all the docs sites for what we talked about today. So aside from that, anybody have any questions, want to talk about something? Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone. That was
Thank you.
awesome.
All
Thank
great.
you.